In the unforgiving heart of the American West, a bargain was struck in ink and desperation. A woman fleeing a past she prayed would never find her, offered her hand in marriage to a stranger. Her only sin, standing a head taller than any woman he'd ever seen. She arrived seeking a home, but found a prison her spirit chipped away by a cruelty as relentless as the Montana wind. She was an outcast, an unwanted giant in a house of secrets. But in the darkest corner of that fractured family, a broken man with haunted eyes watched her. He saw not a flaw, but a fire, and his voice, quiet for so long, was about to become the storm that would tear everything apart. This is the story of how a single defiant whisper, "That's my girl," ignited a revolution. The train shrieked a metallic cry against the vast, indifferent blue of the Montana sky. For Anya Petrova, the sound was the final punctuation mark on a long and desperate sentence, a journey that had bled her of all she had except a single worn suitcase and a hope so fragile it felt like glass in her chest. She stepped down from the carriage, her worn leather boots sinking into the dusty platform of Redemption Gulch. The town was little more than a single dusty street, flanked by weathered wooden storefronts, all of it dwarfed by the jagged, snow-dusted peaks of the distant mountains. And then she stood up straight. At a shade over 6 feet tall, Anya was used to drawing stairs. In the crowded tenements of Chicago, she had been a landmark, a girl whose head rose above the sea of weary faces. But here under the immense open sky, her height felt different. It felt like an accusation. The few men loitering outside the general store stopped there, whittling their eyes, tracking her with a mixture of disbelief and crude curiosity. A woman hurried her children across the street, casting a nervous glance over her shoulder, as if Anya were some unholy omen. A thick-set man with a heavy graying moustache and a face weathered into a permanent scowl detached himself from the shadow of the station. He held a piece of paper, her letter, and his eyes scanned her from head to toe, the appraisal slow and insulting. This was Jedediah Thorne, the man whose name she had written to the man who had promised a new life. "You're the Petrova woman," he grunted, his voice like gravel grinding together. Anya clutched the handle of her suitcase, her knuckles white. "Yes." "Mr. Thorne." He didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the top of her head, then back down to her sturdy frame. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The advertisement had been simple, direct. Wife wanted. Hardy woman of good character for ranch life. Must be willing to work. It had said nothing of stature. Anya had enclosed a photograph, a formal portrait where she was seated. A calculated decision to obscure the one feature that had always defined her. The picture was deceiving, Jedediah said flatly. It wasn't a question. "I am a strong worker, Mr. Thorne." As I wrote in my letters, Anya said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her gut. She had practiced this rehearsed lines of deference and capability. She knew her survival depended on it. He grunted again, a sound of profound displeasure, and snatched her suitcase from her hand. The sheer weight of it seemed to surprise him, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something other than contempt crossed his face. He tossed it into the back of a battered wagon, as if it were a sack of feed. "Get in." The ride to the Thorne Ranch was silent and tense. The landscape was beautiful in a brutal, untamed way, a panorama of rolling grasslands and rocky outcrops that stretched to the horizon. But Anya could not appreciate it. She was too aware of the man beside her, a coiled spring of resentment. She had imagined this moment so differently. She had pictured a polite greeting, perhaps a shy smile. She had not pictured this cold, hard fury. The Thorn Ranch was a sprawling, hard-bitten place. The main house was a 2-story timber structure, sturdy but devoid of any charm, its wood bleached grey by the sun and wind. A woman stood on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. She was thin and severe, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull the skin of her face taut. This was Martha Thorne, Jedediah's wife, and her eyes, when they landed on Anya, were as cold as her husband's. Standing slightly behind her was a younger man, perhaps in his early 20s. He was wiry and had his father's scowl, but without the conviction. He looked at Anya, then quickly looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. This, she would learn, was the younger son Samuel. "This is her," Jedediah announced, hauling Anya's suitcase from the wagon and dropping it in the dust, Martha's thin lips pressed into a bloodless line. She took in Anya's height, her gaze lingering as if on a physical deformity. "Jedediah, what have you brought to our door?" "A field hand, it seems," he sneered. "She's built like a draft horse." Anya flinched, as if struck. The humiliation was a physical blow, hot and sharp. She had been called tall, a giantess, but never had she been compared to livestock. "My name is Anya Petrova," she said, forcing the words out past the lump in her throat. "I came here to be a wife. You came here to do as you're told." Martha corrected her voice, thin and sharp as a needle. "The good Lord does not bless a woman with such a presence. It's unnatural." It was then that Anya saw him. He was leaning against the far corner of the barn, half hidden in the long shadows of the late afternoon. He was tall, though not as tall as she, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his worn shirt. His face was shadowed by the brim of a dusty hat, but she could see a thick, untrimmed beard and a stillness about him that was different from the restless anger of his family. He pushed himself off the wall and began to walk not towards them, but away towards the corrals. He moved with a pronounced limp, his right leg dragging slightly, a broken rhythm against the steady cadence of his left. He never once looked in their direction. "Pay him no mind," Jedediah said, noticing her gaze. "That's Cole, my other son. He's as broken as that leg of his." The dismissal was absolute, coated in years of disappointment. As Samuel scurried to carry her bag inside, under the sharp instruction of his mother, Anya looked out towards the corral. Cole had stopped his back to them, staring out at the vast, empty expanse of the plains. He looked like the loneliest man in the world. And in that moment, trapped between the open hostility of her new family and the crushing indifference of the landscape, Anya felt a kinship with him, a shared sense of being on the outside looking in. The fragile glass of her hope had already begun to crack. The Thorne household operated on a currency of unspoken rules and simmering resentments, and Anya learned quickly that her very existence violated the most fundamental of them. Her height was a constant, unforgivable transgression. Every doorway she had to duck through every time she reached a high shelf without a stool. Every instance where her long stride easily kept pace with Jedediah's angry stomp was met with a tightening of Martha's lips or a fresh wave of contempt from her husband-to-be. The wedding, if one could call it that, was a grim affair held in the ranch's sparsely furnished parlor. A traveling preacher, a man with weary eyes and a stained cravat, mumbled the words with little ceremony. Anya wore her only good dress, a simple blue wool that now felt ill-fitting and conspicuous. Jedediah stood beside her, stiff and silent, his hand gripping her arm with a bruising force when it was time to place the thin, plain band on her finger. He smelled of whiskey and rage. There was no kiss. There was only his gruff command afterwards. The celebration's over. There's mucking to be done. Her new name was a brand Anya Thorne. But she was not a wife. She was chattel. The beating was not a singular event, but a slow, methodical erosion of her spirit. It was in the way Jedediah would cuff the back of her head if she was a moment too slow with his dinner snarling move giant. It was in the way Martha would deliberately place essential pots and pans on the lowest shelves, forcing Anya to stoop and fold her long frame into an awkward, painful crouch, only to mock her for her clumsiness. Like a spider folding in on itself, she'd titter to Samuel, who would offer a weak, sycophantic smile. Samuel, for his part, was a weather vane turning whichever way the wind of his father's temper blew. He would sometimes watch Anya with a strange, furtive expression, a mix of pity and fear, but he never spoke a word in her defense. He was a willing accomplice in her daily humiliation, quick to point out a perceived mistake, a spot of dust on the mantel, a shirt not folded to his mother's exacting standards, eager to deflect the family's casual cruelty away from himself. The work was grueling, a relentless cycle from before dawn until long after dusk. She hauled water-scrubbed floors, mended clothes, tended the sad little vegetable garden, and helped with the chickens. Her strong body, which Jedediah had mocked, was the only thing that allowed her to endure. But her strength seemed only to fuel his resentment. One blustery afternoon, a line of wet laundry she had just hung was ripped from its moorings by a sudden violent gust of wind, sending the clean sheets sailing into the muddy pigsty. Jedediah saw it from the barn. He stormed towards her, his face a thundercloud. Useless, he bellowed, his voice carrying across the yard. Can't even do a woman's work right. You're an oaf, a great clumsy oaf. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. Anya braced herself, the familiar knot of fear tightening in her stomach. It was the wind. Jedediah, don't you talk back to me. He raised his hand, and for the first time she knew he was going to strike her in the face. She squeezed her eyes shut, a tear of pure hot rage escaping. The blow never came. The fence post is down by the north pasture. The voice was low and rough like stones rolling downhill. It came from behind them. Anya's eyes flew open. Cole was standing there, his limp more pronounced after a long day's work. His hat was pushed back, revealing a face that was younger than she'd thought, though etched with lines of pain and exhaustion. His eyes, a startlingly clear grey, were not on Anya, but fixed on his father. Jedediah's arm remained frozen in the air for a moment, the fury in his eyes now warring with a different, more complex emotion. He seemed to shrink slightly under his older son's gaze. I'll handle it, Jedediah snapped, dropping Anya's arm as if it were burning him. He shot her one last venomous look. Get the laundry, wash it again, and if it's not done by supper, you'll not eat for 2 days. He stomped away towards the north pasture, a man whose authority had been subtly but undeniably challenged. Anya stood trembling, her arm throbbing where he had gripped it. She looked at Cole. He was still watching his father's retreating back. He hadn't defended her. Not really. He had simply created a diversion. Yet it was more than anyone had ever done for her in this godforsaken place. He finally turned his head, and his grey eyes met hers. There was no pity in them, no kindness. There was just a flat, weary acknowledgement, a silent understanding of the tyranny they both lived under. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and limped towards the barn, disappearing into the shadows as if he were a part of them. Anya watched him go, a strange and unfamiliar feeling blooming in her chest. It was a tiny, fragile seed, but it was there. Hope. She took a deep breath, the cold Montana air filling her lungs, and walked towards the pigsty to retrieve the soiled laundry. The work was still there, the cruelty was still there, but something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the solid wall of her despair. She was not entirely alone. Life on the Thorn Ranch remained a landscape of hardship, but Anya now clung to the memory of Cole's intervention like a lone traveler, cherishing a single match in a blizzard. It didn't warm her, not yet, but it was a promise of potential light. She began to observe him more closely, the silent, broken man who moved along the periphery of the family's venom. She saw the way his hands, though calloused and scarred, were surprisingly gentle with the horses. He spoke to them in low murmurs, a language of quiet reassurance that he never used with people. She saw the way his eyes would sometimes drift to the distant mountains, a look of profound, caged longing on his face. And she saw the nightly ritual of pain as he lowered himself into a chair, his jaw tight, his hand unconsciously massaging his crippled thigh. He was a man living in a fortress of silence, and she was beginning to see the cracks in its walls. The first snowfall of the season came early, a thick, wet blanket that turned the world white and treacherous overnight. With it came a new set of chores and a new level of misery. One morning, Martha woke with a hacking cough and a fever that left her weak and demanding. She sent Anya out to the root cellar to fetch preserved peaches, her voice a reedy whine from her bed. The root cellar was a dark, damp pit dug into the earth with steep, narrow steps leading down. Years of moisture had made the wooden steps slick with a thin layer of mossy slime. As Anya descended, her arms laden with jars, her boot slipped. She pinwheeled a frantic, clumsy dance in the enclosed space. Jars of beets and beans smashed against the stone walls, the dark red juice mingling with the brown brine, looking unnervingly like blood on the floor. Miraculously, she caught herself on the final step, saving the precious peaches, but sending a jolt of pain through her twisted ankle. She limped back into the kitchen, her heart pounding. Jedediah was there pouring himself a cup of coffee. He saw her face, then glanced down at the single jar of peaches in her hands. "Where's the rest?" he demanded. I slipped Mr. Thorne. On the steps. They're slick with ice and moss," she stammered, hating the fear in her own voice. His eyes narrowed. "You slipped. A great strapping thing like you, and you can't even walk down a flight of stairs. What did you break?" "Just some beets and beans. I saved the peaches for your mother." "You saved the peaches," he mimicked in a high, cruel voice. "You'll be paying for the broken jars out of your... Well, you have nothing. You'll work it off. You'll spend the afternoon down there, cleaning up your mess. And you'll do it without a lamp. Maybe the dark will teach you to watch your step." Tears of frustration pricked at Anya's eyes. To be sent into the pitch-black freezing cellar with her throbbing ankle was a punishment of exquisite cruelty. To clean shattered glass in the dark was dangerous. "But Jedediah, I can't see. I'll cut myself." "Then you'll learn to feel," he said, turning his back on her. "Now go." With a heavy heart, Anya limped back to the cellar. The darkness was absolute, a thick, cold presence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. The air smelled of damp earth and vinegar. She lowered herself carefully onto the floor. her hands outstretched, flinching every time her fingers brushed against the sharp edge of a glass shard. It was a hopeless, terrifying task. She didn't know how long she had been down there when a sliver of light appeared. It was the cellar door opening just a crack. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was Jedediah coming back to inflict some new torment. But the figure that blocked the light was Cole's. He didn't say a word. He simply descended the treacherous steps, his limp more pronounced in the confined space. In one hand, he carried a lit lantern, its golden glow pushing back the oppressive darkness and revealing the full extent of the mess. In his other hand, he held a stiff brush and a dustpan. He set the lantern on a shelf, the light casting long, dancing shadows. Anya stared at him speechless. He still hadn't looked at her. He knelt, his bad leg stretched out awkwardly, and began sweeping the larger pieces of glass into the pan. The only sounds were the scrape of the brush against stone and his own labored breathing. Finally, Anya found her voice. "He told me," he said. "No lamp." Cole paused, looking up. His grey eyes seemed to catch the lantern light and hold it. "I know what he said." He went back to his work. Anya watched him for a moment, then hesitantly, she began to gather the larger pieces of glass by hand, her movements careful in the blessed light. They worked in seance, a strange, unspoken partnership in the cold, damp earth, when the last of the glass and spilled vegetables were in a bucket. Cole stood up, wincing as he put weight on his leg. He picked up the lantern. "There's a loose board on the third step," he said, his voice a low rasp. "That's where you slipped." Anya looked from his face to the stairs. "How did you know a shadow passed over his features?" "Because it's the same one that tripped me." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. In that single sentence, Anya understood that his limp wasn't from some long-ago accident on the range. It was from here. It was from this house. It was she suspected from their father. He turned to leave. "Cole," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He stopped at the top of the stairs, but didn't turn around. "Thank you." He stood there for a long moment, his back to her. Then, without another word, he walked out, leaving the cellar door ajar. So a sliver of daylight remained. Anya stood in that thin beam of light, the warmth of the lantern still on her skin, and for the first time, she felt not just hope, but the stirrings of a defiant strength. Her height hadn't caused her to fall. A broken piece of the house had. And the one person who understood was the one everyone else called broken. The shared secret of the root cellar became an invisible thread between Anya and Cole. There were no more spoken words, no overt acts of alliance, but a current of awareness now flowed between them. Anya would find a bucket of well water waiting for her by the porch in the morning, saving her the first icy trip of the day. Cole would discover a neatly mended tear in his work coat, stitched with a skill far beyond his own rough attempts. They were small, silent gestures, offerings, left at the edge of each other's lonely islands. This fragile truce did not go unnoticed. Martha's eyes, sharp and malicious, missed nothing. She saw the glances the way Cole no longer immediately left a room when Anya entered. Her cruelty found a new, sharper focus. "Your pet giant seems to have found a friend," she'd say to Jedediah over dinner, her voice laced with poison. The broken leading the bungler. A fine pair. Jedediah would just grunt his anger, a constant low-burning fire. His focus had shifted. A man named Peterson, a banker from Redemption Gulch, had started making regular visits to the ranch. He was a small, neat man, with a perpetually worried expression and a ledger book he was never without. His conversations with Jedediah were held behind the closed door of the study, but the raised, angry voices that filtered out told a story of debt and desperation. The ranch Anya began to realize was failing. Jedediah's rage was not just that of a tyrant, but of a king whose kingdom was crumbling. This financial pressure only made him more volatile. One evening, when a horse threw a shoe, Jedediah blamed Cole's limp for his slowness in the forge. "If I had a whole son," he roared, his face purple with fury, "I wouldn't be in this mess. Everything you touch, you break. You're a curse on this family, a constant reminder of failure." Cole stood impassive, his face a mask of stone, absorbing the verbal blows as if they were hailstones, painful but survivable. But Anya, watching from the kitchen window, saw the tremor in his hands, the deep, shuddering breath he took when his father finally stormed away. Later that night, unable to sleep, Anya crept downstairs for a drink of water. A low groan from the parlor stopped her. Pushing the door open a crack, she saw Cole silhouetted by moonlight. He was sitting in a chair, his bad leg propped on a stool. In his hand was a bottle of whiskey, and beside him on the table lay a fearsome-looking metal brace, the kind used to set shattered bones. He was trying with shaking hands to unbuckle the stiff leather straps that bound it to his thigh. He was sweating, his breath coming in ragged gasps of pain. "Damn it," he hissed, fumbling with a buckle. Anya pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Let me," she said, softly. He looked up, his eyes wide and vulnerable in the moonlight. For a moment, she saw not the broken boy, but a young man trapped in a prison of pain. He hesitated, then gave a short, defeated nod. She knelt before him. The brace was a crude, heavy thing of iron and leather. It looked like a torture device. As her fingers worked the stiff, cold buckles, she could feel the heat radiating from his leg, the unnatural rigidity of the muscle beneath. "It's old," he said, his voice strained. "The injury happened when I was 16. "A horse?" she asked gently, her eyes focused on her task. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "I wish. A horse is an honest creature. It throws you, you know the reason." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. It was him. Jedediah. Anya froze her fingers, still on the last buckle. She looked up at him. "He'd been drinking," Cole continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the past. "I'd left a gate open, and 2 calves got out. It was a mistake, a boy's mistake. But he saw it as defiance. He came at me with a fence post, said he'd teach me to respect his property. My mother, Martha. She just stood on the porch and watched. The story hung in the air, cold and heavy as the iron brace. Anya finally unfastened the last strap and carefully eased the device away from his leg. The flesh beneath was a road map of scarred tissue, pale and puckered. "My leg was shattered," Cole said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The doctor from town wanted to take it off, said it was the only way. Jedediah wouldn't allow it. Not because he cared, but because an amputee son would be a greater shame. So he had the blacksmith fashion this contraption. He told everyone I fell from the hayloft, a clumsy accident." Anya gently placed the brace on the floor, the metal clanking softly in the silent room. She looked at his face, at the deep-seated pain in his eyes, and understood everything. His limp wasn't a weakness. It was a monument to to his father's cruelty. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was a shield. "And you?" he asked, his voice rough. "Chicago. Why leave a city for—" This Anya thought of her own past, the reason she had answered a mail-order bride ad in the first place. She had been a governess for a wealthy family, the Hendersons. Mr. Henderson was a man of power and influence, a man who saw what he wanted and took it. His attentions had turned to the tall, quiet governess. When she had refused him, he had framed her for theft, using his connections to ensure no one in the city would ever hire her again. She was ruined, her name whispered in gossip. Her future a blank wall. The advertisement from Montana had been a lifeline, a chance to disappear and start over where no one knew her name. "I was running," she admitted, her voice low. "From a man who thought he owned me. A man like your father." In the quiet, moonlit parlor, their secrets lay bare between them. They were two people from different worlds, a tall woman from a bustling city and a broken cowboy from the empty plains. But their wounds came from the same source, the tyranny of powerful, cruel men. Cole reached out his hand, hovering over hers for a second, before he gently touched her fingers. His touch was warm, tentative. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of recognition. "I see you. I understand." "He's losing the ranch," Anya Cole said, his voice urgent. "Peterson the banker. He's going to foreclose. Jedediah's getting desperate, and a desperate man is dangerous." Anya looked into his tired, pain-filled eyes and knew he was right. The fortress of silence that had protected Cole for so long was beginning to crumble, and the quiet war they had been waging in the shadows was about to be dragged into the light. The confession in the moonlight changed everything. The unspoken truce between Anya and Cole solidified into a conscious, albeit perilous, alliance. They were no longer just two lonely souls orbiting each other's misery. They were co-conspirators in a household that was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Their communication remained clandestine, conducted in fleeting moments when the ever-watchful eyes of Jedediah and Martha were elsewhere. A whispered conversation by the woodpile, a hastily passed note tucked inside a seed packet, a shared look across the dinner table that spoke volumes. They were mapping out the battlefield, trying to understand the full extent of Jedediah's desperation. Cole, using his knowledge of the ranch's operations, began to piece together the financial puzzle. He sold off the northern herd last spring, he told Anya one evening, as they stood in the deepening twilight near the horse trough. Told everyone it was to cull the weak stock. He lied. The money went straight to Peterson, and it wasn't enough. Anya, in turn, became a careful observer inside the house. She saw the way Martha was secretly stashing away small valuables, a silver locket, a pair of pearl earrings, the good china in a locked trunk beneath her bed. The rats were preparing to flee the sinking ship. "She knows," Anya murmured to Cole as they feigned checking a loose fence line far from the house. "Martha knows it's all about to end. She's looking after herself." "She always does," Cole replied, his tone laced with a bitterness that was decades old. Their alliance gave Anya a newfound courage. The daily taunts and casual cruelties, while still painful, no longer shattered her. She now had a purpose beyond mere survival. She began to subtly push back in ways only she could. When Martha complained about a high shelf being dusty, Anya would simply state, "Then you should have had Jedediah build them lower." When Samuel tried to mock her stride, she fixed him with a stare so direct and unflinching that he stammered and retreated. She wasn't aggressive, but she was no longer pliant. She was a tall tree that was learning not to bend to every wind, but to stand its ground. This shift in her demeanor infuriated Jedediah. He saw it as defiance, a direct challenge to his authority, and his temper, already frayed by his financial woes, grew shorter and more explosive. He seemed to be looking for a reason to break her, to reassert his dominance once and for all. He found his chance on a day when the sky was the color of a fresh bruise. Peterson, the banker, made an unexpected visit. This time he didn't go into the study. He stood on the porch, his face grim, and handed Jedediah an official-looking envelope. Through the window, Anya and Cole watched the exchange. They couldn't hear the words, but they saw Jedediah's face turn ashen, then a dark, mottled red. He ripped the letter in two. Peterson just shook his head, sadly, tipped his hat, and drove his buggy away, leaving Jedediah standing alone with the pieces of his ruin in his hand. Jedediah stormed into the house like a hurricane. "Where is she?" He bellowed, his eyes wild. "Where is that walking curse?" He found Anya in the kitchen, kneading bread dough. He grabbed the wooden board, flour and dough flying, and hurled it against the wall. "This is your fault," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Everything was fine until you brought your bad luck, your unnatural presence into this house." "My presence has nothing to do with your debts, Jedediah," Anya said, her voice shaking but firm. Cole had warned her this was coming. They had a plan. A desperate, risky plan. "You dare!" He advanced on her, his hands clenched into fists. "You stand there a giant in my own home, and you dare to speak of my affairs." From the doorway, Martha and Samuel watched, their faces pale. Martha's eyes held a glint of cruel satisfaction. Samuel looked terrified. This was the moment. "I do dare," Anya said, taking a half-step back, positioning herself closer to the pantry. "Because I have a proposition for you, a way to save your precious ranch." Jedediah stopped momentarily, thrown off by her words. "A proposition? What could you possibly have to offer?" Anya took a deep breath. This was the gamble. "In my suitcase," she said slowly and clearly, "is a bank draft. For $5,000. The room went silent. $5,000? It was an astronomical sum, more than enough to clear the debt and save the ranch. Jedediah stared at her, his mouth agape. Martha's eyes widened with pure, naked greed. "You're lying," Jedediah finally spat, but the conviction was gone from his voice. The possibility, however remote, was too tantalizing. "My father was a man of some means in Chicago." Anya lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the story she and Cole had concocted, woven from a sliver of truth. Her father had been a skilled craftsman, but he had left her nothing but his tools. This was my dowry. I was to give it to my husband upon the birth of our first son. But I see now that waiting is a luxury you cannot afford. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his pride against his desperation. "I will give you the money," Anya continued, pressing her advantage. "You will save your ranch. But there are conditions." Conditions, he sneered, regaining a fraction of his bluster. "Yes," Anya said, lifting her chin. "From this day forward, you will never lay a hand on me, or speak to me with anything but respect. I will be treated as your wife, the mistress of this house, not your servant. And Cole," she glanced towards the door where she knew he was listening, "Cole will be given a proper wage and the respect due a son. Jedediah's face contorted in a mask of fury and humiliation. To be dictated to by this woman, this outsider, was the ultimate degradation. But the lure of the money, the salvation of his pride and his land, was a siren's call. "Get the draft," he snarled. "Let me see it. If this is a trick—" "There is one more condition," a low voice said from the hallway. Cole stepped into the kitchen. He wasn't limping. He stood tall, his weight evenly distributed, his face set like granite. He had, for this moment, willed his body to obey him, to show no weakness. He looked directly at his father. "The deed to the ranch," Cole said, his voice ringing with an authority no one in the room had ever heard from him. "It gets signed over to Anya. If she is providing the funds to save it, then it is hers. You and Mother can live here, work here. But you will answer to her." It was a master stroke. A move so audacious it left Jedediah speechless. Martha let out a horrified gasp. The ranch was her identity, her power. To be a tenant in her own home was unthinkable. "You," Jedediah whispered, his eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. He looked from Anya's calm, resolute face to Cole's unyielding stare. He was trapped, cornered by the two people he had spent years tormenting. "The bank draft is in my suitcase upstairs," Anya said calmly. "The choice is yours, Jedediah." The lie was perfect. The bank draft didn't exist, but in Anya's suitcase, tucked into a false bottom, Cole had cleverly built, was the Henderson family's address in Chicago and a half-written letter detailing Mr. Henderson's crimes. It was a bluff, a desperate gambit that rested entirely on Jedediah's greed and the hope that he would not call it. The alliance had drawn its battle lines, and the war for the Thorn Ranch had just begun. The silence that followed Cole's ultimatum was heavier than any Montana winter. Jedediah stood in the center of the kitchen, a man visibly warring with the twin demons of pride and ruin. His empire, built on fear and intimidation, was being dismantled before his eyes by the two subjects he had most despised. "You conspire against me," he finally hissed, his voice a low, venomous rumble. He looked at Cole, and the hatred in his eyes was ancient and profound. "You a cripple, and you," he spat, turning to Anya, a barren giantess. "You think you can take this from me?" "We're not taking anything," Cole said, his voice steady. "We're saving it. But the old ways are done, Father." The word father was a lash. Jedediah flinched. He looked at Martha, expecting support, an ally in his outrage. But Martha's face was a mask of cold calculation. Her greedy eyes darted from Anya to the staircase, where the imaginary $5,000 presumably lay. In her mind, the deed was a trifle compared to securing that kind of money. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Jedediah. Her betrayal was silent, but absolute. Jedediah saw it. He saw the greed in his wife's eyes, the newfound strength in his broken son, the quiet defiance of the woman he was supposed to own. The world had tilted on its axis. He was no longer the center of it. "Fine," he snarled the word, tearing from his throat. "Get the draft. We'll go to the bank in the morning. We'll see Peterson. We'll sign the papers." He looked at Anya, a venomous promise in his eyes. "But know this. You may own the paper, but this is still my land. You will regret this day." He stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door so hard, a plate rattled off a shelf and shattered on the floor. Samuel, who had been frozen in the corner like a frightened rabbit, scurried after him. Martha, her composure regained, looked at Anya with a new reptilian kind of assessment. "You were cleverer than I thought," she said, before turning and gliding out of the room, already planning her new position of influence. The moment they were alone, Cole's facade of strength crumbled. He leaned heavily against the doorframe, his bad leg trembling from the strain of standing firm for so long. The pain was etched back onto his face. "He'll call the bluff, Anya." He breathed, his voice tight. "When we get to the bank tomorrow and there's no money, he'll kill us both. He won't." Anya said, her own heart still racing. She went to him, placing a hand on his arm. His pride won't let him. He cannot walk into that bank with Peterson and admit he was fooled by us. He'd rather lose the ranch than suffer that humiliation. "You don't know him," Cole said, shaking his head. "I know men like him," Anya countered softly. "Their pride is the only thing more important than their money." Their plan, however, had a second, more dangerous part. The letter. The real content and tool of her suitcase. That night, under the cover of a sky thick with unshed snow, Cole saddled a horse. Not his usual steady mount, but the fastest mare on the ranch. Anya met him behind the barn, a small bundle of food and the sealed letter in her hands. "You have to ride for the telegraph office in Miles City," Anya said, her voice urgent. "It's further, but he won't think to look for you there. Send 2 telegrams, one to the address on this letter in Chicago. It's for a man named Mr. Davies, a lawyer I once consulted. It tells him where I am, and that I am in danger." She paused, taking a breath. The other is to the U.S. Marshals Service. It reports a man, Jedediah Thorne, for the attempted murder of his son, Cole Thorne, 16 years ago. Cole stared at her, the full weight of her words sinking in. This went beyond saving the ranch. This was about justice, about tearing down the whole rotten structure. "Anya, they won't believe it. It was years ago. My word against his. It's your word and my testimony as a witness to his ongoing brutality, and the word of a doctor in town who wanted to take your leg," she argued. "It's enough to bring them here. It's enough to start the storm." He looked at the letter, then back at her face illuminated by the sliver of a moon. He saw the fierce determination in her eyes, the strength he had never seen in anyone. He finally nodded. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Before he gets you to the bank." He swung himself into the saddle, his movements stiff with pain. He looked down at her, a world of unspoken emotion passing between them. He was no longer the broken cowboy, and she was no longer the victimized bride. They were soldiers in a war of their own making. But as he turned the horse to leave, the barn door creaked open. Samuel stood there, a lantern held high, his face a mess of terror and confusion. "Cole, what are you doing?" Before Cole could answer, a shape detached itself from the deeper shadows of the barn. It was Jedediah, and in his hand was a shotgun. "Going somewhere, boy." Jedediah's voice was unnervingly calm. He had been waiting. He had known somehow that they would try something. His pride would not let him be fooled, and his paranoia had served him well. "I knew you didn't have it in you to be my son. Always weak. Always plotting." He raised the shotgun, the twin barrels pointing directly at Cole's chest. Anya's blood ran cold. This was it. The bluff had been called. No Samuel screamed a raw, terrified sound. He took a step forward. "Father, don't." Jedediah ignored him. His eyes were locked on Cole. You tried to take my legacy. My name. He cocked the hammers on the shotgun. The clicks echoed in the freezing air like a death sentence. Anya knew she had to do something, anything. She couldn't let Cole die for her plan. Just as Jedediah's finger tightened on the trigger, Anya lunged. Not at Jedediah, but at a tall stack of empty barrels piled against the barn wall. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she shoved the stack with all her might. The barrels toppled with a deafening crash, rolling and bouncing across the hard-packed earth, directly towards Jedediah. He swore instinctively, turning and stumbling back to avoid the rolling obstacles. The shotgun discharged its blast, tearing a hole in the night sky far wide of its intended target. The horse, terrified by the noise and chaos, reared violently. Cole, caught off guard, fought for control. In that split second of mayhem, Anya didn't hesitate. She ran straight for Jedediah. He was off balance, trying to bring the heavy gun back to bear. She didn't try to fight him for it. She simply used the one thing he had always despised, her one great, unforgivable flaw. She used her height. She lowered her shoulder and drove herself forward, hitting him squarely in the chest. The impact was immense. Jedediah, for all his wiry strength, was no match for her momentum. He flew backwards, his head cracking against the hard corner of the water trough with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground and lay still. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the panicked whinny of the horse and Samuel's ragged, sobbing breaths. Cole finally calmed his mount and slid from the saddle, rushing to Anya's side. He looked from her to the still form of his father on the ground. Then his eyes fell on something else. Where Jedediah had fallen, his jacket had been torn open. Tucked into his waistband, visible in the moonlight, was a small leather-bound pouch. From it spilled a cascade of glittering jewels, a diamond necklace, ruby earrings, a sapphire brooch. It was Martha's secret stash. He had found it. He wasn't going to the bank to save the ranch. He was going to take the jewels and run. Suddenly, a voice, sharp and defiant, cut through the night. He was right. You are a curse. Anya and Cole spun around. It was Samuel. His face was no longer terrified. It was twisted with a strange, resolute anger. He was holding the shotgun, his small frame trembling as he hefted its weight and pointed it directly at Anya. You brought this down on us, he whimpered, tears streaming down his face. You ruined everything. Cole stepped in front of Anya, shielding her with his body. He held his hands up. Samuel put the gun down. It's over. No, Samuel cried. He was my father. It was then that Cole finally truly looked at his brother. He saw past the weak, sniveling boy and saw the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Samuel didn't have Jedediah's dark hair or Martha's thin features. He had the fair hair and pale eyes of Peterson the banker. He wasn't your father, Samuel Cole said, his voice quiet, but carrying the immense weight of revelation. From the porch of the main house, a single piercing scream echoed through the night. Martha stood there, bathed in the lamplight from the doorway, her face a mask of ultimate horror. She had seen it all. The fall of her husband, the theft of her escape plan, and the final ruinous secret laid bare. It was in that moment of stunned silence, with a father lying motionless, a brother holding a gun he didn't know how to use, and a mother's world completely shattered, that Cole reached back his hand, finding Anya's. He pulled her gently from behind him to stand at his side. He looked at her height, her fierce loyalty, her unyielding strength. He looked at the chaos she had unleashed to save them both. And with the whole world falling apart around them, he looked at Samuel, at the house, at the memory of his father, and said with a voice full of awe and fierce possession, the two words that changed everything. "That's my girl." The sound of Cole's words hung in the frigid air, a declaration that redrew the map of their world. For a moment, nothing moved. Samuel stood, shaking the heavy shotgun wavering in his hands, his young face a canvas of confusion and grief. The revelation that Jedediah was not his biological father had shattered his reality, leaving him unmoored. Slowly, carefully, Cole took a step towards him. "Samuel," he said, his voice gentle, stripped of all rivalry. "It's over. Look at him. Look at what he was doing." He gestured with his head towards the spilled jewels glittering in the dust near Jedediah's still form. He wasn't protecting the family. He was robbing it. He was running just like her. He glanced towards the porch where Martha stood, a statue of silent despair. The fight drained out of Samuel all at once. The shotgun barrel dipped towards the ground. A gut-wrenching sob escaped him, the sound of a boy's heart breaking. He dropped the weapon, and it thudded softly onto the earth. Anya moved instinctively, not with fear, but with a surprising wave of pity. She went to him, and without a word, rested a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then collapsed into himself, weeping. Lights began to appear in the distance. The gunshot had not gone unheard. Neighbors from the nearest ranch's men who had known the Thorns for years were riding over to investigate. The hours that followed were a blur of stark reality. Jedediah wasn't dead, but the blow to his head had left him with a severe concussion, dazed and incoherent. The arrival of the neighbors, followed shortly by the town sheriff, summoned by a rider, brought the family's dark secrets crashing into the public eye. The jewels were the first piece of undeniable evidence. Martha, forced to explain their presence in her husband's waistband, crumbled. Her carefully constructed facade of the pious, long-suffering ranch wife evaporated, revealing the greedy, scheming woman she truly was. Her affair with Peterson the banker, a long-whispered rumor in town, was all but confirmed by Samuel's uncanny resemblance to the man. Then came Cole's testimony. With Anya standing steadfastly by his side, he told the sheriff everything. He spoke of the fence post, the brace, the years of physical and emotional abuse, the constant threats. He told them about Jedediah's plan to flee with Martha's jewels. Anya corroborated his story, her calm, articulate account of the cruelty she had endured since her arrival, lending immense weight to Cole's words. Her height, once a source of shame and ridicule, now gave her an air of authority of unimpeachable presence. She was not a hysterical woman. She was a witness. Jedediah Thorn, the tyrant of Redemption Gulch, was arrested. Even if he recovered fully from his injury, he faced charges of assault theft, and worse. The telegram to the U.S. Marshals was never sent, but it was no longer needed. The reckoning had come. In the aftermath, the Thorn Ranch was a place of quiet upheaval. Martha, disgraced and ostracized, packed a single bag and left on the morning stagecoach, her destination unknown. She didn't say goodbye to either of her sons. Samuel, lost and adrift, was taken in by a neighboring family, the Wrights, who pitied the boy and had always disliked Jedediah's arrogance. The ranch fell silent. For the first time, there were no angry shouts, no cruel whispers, no heavy, resentful footsteps. There was only the sound of the wind and the lowing of the remaining cattle. The foreclosure notice was still a threat, but the revelation of Peterson's affair and his complicity in the Thorne family drama made the bank hesitant to act immediately, especially with the town's sentiment now firmly behind Cole and Anya. One crisp, clear morning, Cole and Anya stood on the porch of the house, looking out over the land. It felt different now, not like a prison, but like a promise. "It's a lot of work," Cole said, his voice quiet. "For just two people." "I'm a strong worker," Anya replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Built like a draft horse, remember?" Cole turned to her, his grey eyes clear and free of the pain that had clouded them for so long. He reached out and took her hand. "I'm sorry, Anya, for all of it, for what he did, for what I didn't do for so long." "You did something in the end, Cole," she said, squeezing his hand. "You stood up. That was everything." He looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. He had to tilt his head back slightly to meet her eyes, and he smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "I guess I've always had a thing for tall women." Anya laughed, a real unburdened laugh that seemed to echo across the plains. "And what about the $5,000, she teased. "And the deed to the ranch." Cole's smile widened. "The deed is a piece of paper. The ranch is just dirt and wood. We can fight the bank. We can rebuild. We can make our own legacy." He paused, his expression turning serious. "What I found, what I fought for, was you." He stepped closer, and this time there was no hesitation. He slid his hand from hers to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing her jawline. He was not the broken cowboy anymore, and she was not the beaten mail-order bride. They were survivors. They were partners. He leaned in and kissed her a kiss that held all the promise of a new dawn, a future they would build together, standing tall and unashamed in the heart of the unforgiving land that they would now finally call home. And so the house built on cruelty and secrets was cleansed by the truth. Anya and Cole. Two souls brought together by desperation found in each other the strength to tear down a tyrant and build a new life from the ruins. Their story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the power you wield over others, but the courage you find to stand against injustice no matter how daunting the odds. It reminds us that family isn't always the one you're born into, but the one you fight for. What did you think of Anya's incredible bravery and Cole's transformation? Let us know in the comments below. If their story of resilience and love moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a story of hope. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will capture your heart. Thank you for listening.